One wrong decision, one moment of weakness. That's all it took to transform the world's tallest peak into the 6 most horrifying deaths on Mount Everest. It was May 10th, 1996, when Mount Everest became a frozen graveyard that would forever change mountaineering history. Rob Hall, a 35-year-old New Zealand mountain guide, had built his reputation as one of the world's most experienced Everest climbers. Standing 6 feet tall with weathered hands and piercing blue eyes, Hall was known for his meticulous planning and unwavering commitment to client safety. He had successfully guided 39 climbers to Everest's summit without losing a single life. His company, Adventure Consultants, was considered the gold standard of high-altitude guiding. On the opposite side of base camp was Scott Fisher, a 40-year-old American expedition leader from Seattle. Fisher was Hall's polar opposite, a free-spirited adventurer with shoulder-length blonde hair and an infectious laugh that could be heard across the Khumbu Valley. The former construction worker turned professional guide was known for his laid-back approach and philosophical outlook on climbing. His company, Mountain Madness, attracted clients who wanted a more relaxed Everest experience. Both men were leading separate commercial expeditions up the mountain's south route. Hall's team included 8 clients, while Fisher guided 8 others. The weather had been perfect for days, creating a dangerous bottleneck as multiple teams rushed toward the summit simultaneously. As dawn broke on May 10th, both expeditions began their final push from Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. The death zone stretched above them, an altitude where human life cannot be sustained for extended periods. Hall had established a strict turnaround time of 2 p.m., regardless of summit success. But as the day progressed, everything went catastrophically wrong. The bottleneck at the Hillary Step, a 40-foot vertical rock face just 300 feet below the summit, created deadly delays. Climbers waited in line for hours in the death zone, burning precious oxygen and energy. Fisher, who had been feeling unwell for days, began showing signs of severe altitude sickness. The normally energetic guide became sluggish and disoriented, struggling to keep pace with his own clients. Meanwhile, Hall faced an agonizing decision when one of his clients, Doug Hansen, was moving too slowly to make the turnaround time. Against his own rules, Hall chose to continue with Hansen, reaching the summit at 4 p.m., 2 hours past his safety deadline. Fisher's team also summited late, with some clients not reaching the top until after 3 p.m. Then the mountain unleashed its fury. A massive storm system slammed into Everest with 70-mile-per-hour winds and blinding snow. Temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The late summit times meant both teams were caught in the death zone during the worst conditions imaginable. Fisher, weakened by illness and exhaustion, collapsed at 27,200 feet during the descent. His body simply gave out, and he died alone in the howling wind. Hall became stranded near the south summit at 28,700 feet with Hansen, who had also collapsed. Despite desperate rescue attempts, both men perished in the storm. The disaster claimed 8 lives in 48 hours, making it the deadliest climbing season in Everest history at that time. Hall's body was found months later, still sitting upright against a rock formation, his radio clutched in his frozen hand. Fisher's remains were discovered lower on the mountain, partially buried in snow. The tragedy exposed the dark side of commercial Everest climbing, where paying clients with limited experience were guided into the world's most dangerous environment. Both Hall and Fisher had been experienced professionals who made fatal decisions under extreme pressure, proving that even skilled mountaineers are no match for Everest's lethal combination of altitude, weather, and human error. Their deaths forever changed how expeditions approach the world's tallest peak. It was May 10, 1996, when Sewang Paljor embarked on what would become his final journey, forever transforming him into Mount Everest's most haunting landmark. Paljor was a 28-year-old head constable with the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, a rugged mountain unit responsible for patrolling India's treacherous 2,167-mile border with China. Born in the small village of Sakti in Ladakh, He grew up surrounded by towering peaks that shaped his destiny. Standing 5 feet 8 inches tall with calloused hands and determined dark eyes, Paljor possessed the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life navigating high-altitude terrain. His colleagues described him as methodical and fearless, traits that made him ideal for the ITBP's ambitious Everest expedition. The mission was historic, the first Indian attempt to conquer the 29,032-foot peak from its dangerous eastern flank. Led by Commandant Mohinder Singh, the 6-man team consisted entirely of experienced border police climbers who chose to tackle Everest without hiring Sherpa guides, relying solely on their military training and mountain expertise. Paljor's teammates included Sewang Smanla, a 31-year-old veteran climber, and Dorje Morup, a 28-year-old specialist in high-altitude rescue operations. The trio had trained together for months, developing an unbreakable bond forged through countless hours, navigating the world's most hostile mountain environments. As the expedition progressed up Everest's northeast ridge, conditions deteriorated rapidly. A massive blizzard engulfed the mountain, creating whiteout conditions with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. Temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the death zone into an even more lethal environment. 3 team members made the prudent decision to retreat to safety, but Paljor, Smanla, and Morup pressed forward, driven by their military discipline and an unshakable commitment to their mission. They were determined to plant the Indian flag on Everest's summit, regardless of the mounting dangers. At 3:45 p.m. on May 10th, the trio radioed their base camp with electrifying news. They had reached the summit. However, evidence later suggested they may have been 150 meters short of the actual peak, confused by the storm's poor visibility and disorienting conditions. Then they vanished into the howling tempest. Below at Camp 6, their teammates caught glimpses of headlamps near the second step at 28,117 feet, but the 3 climbers never returned to their high camp at 27,231 feet. Paljor's final moments remained shrouded in mystery. Separated from his teammates during the descent, he sought shelter under a limestone boulder at 27,890 feet. Wearing his distinctive bright green Koflak mountaineering boots, he succumbed to hypothermia and exhaustion in what became known as Green Boots Cave. His body, perfectly preserved by Everest's freezing temperatures, became an inadvertent landmark for future climbers attempting the northeast ridge route. The alcove where he died transformed into a grim waypoint, with mountaineers using green boots as a navigation reference point in the death zone. For over 2 decades, Paljor's remains served as a haunting reminder of Everest's deadly power. His bright green boots became synonymous with the mountain's dark side, representing the thin line between triumph and tragedy at extreme altitude. In 2014, reports emerged that the body had disappeared, leading to speculation about respectful removal. However, by 2017, climbers confirmed Green Boots was visible again, now surrounded by additional rocks. Paljor's tragic fate highlighted the extreme risks faced by climbers attempting Everest without supplemental oxygen or extensive support teams. The young border police officer who dreamed of conquering the world's tallest peak instead became its most recognizable casualty, forever frozen as a sobering testament to Everest's unforgiving nature. It was May 15, 2006, when David Sharp made his final ascent on Mount Everest, becoming the center of mountaineering's most controversial ethical debate. Sharp was a 34-year-old mathematics teacher from Gisborough, England, whose quiet demeanor masked an obsessive determination to conquer the world's tallest peak. Standing 5 feet 10 inches tall with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he looked more like a university professor than an extreme mountaineer. But beneath his unassuming appearance burned a relentless passion for high-altitude climbing that had consumed his life for over a decade. Working as a substitute teacher allowed Sharp the flexibility to pursue his mountaineering dreams during school breaks. He lived frugally, saving every penny for his climbing expeditions while residing in a modest flat filled with mountaineering gear. His colleagues described him as intensely private and single-minded, someone who would spend hours studying weather patterns and route descriptions with scientific precision. Sharp had already attempted Everest twice from the north side, losing several toes to frostbite during his previous efforts. The pain and permanent disfigurement only strengthened his resolve. He famously declared he was prepared to lose more digits if it meant reaching the summit, displaying the kind of dangerous obsession that worried his few close friends. For his third attempt, Sharp chose the budget option with Asian Trekking, paying for their no-service package above Advanced Base Camp at 21,300 feet. This meant he would climb alone above that point, with no Sherpa support, no radio contact, and minimal oxygen supplies. He carried only 2 bottles of supplemental oxygen, far less than the 4 to 6 bottles most climbers used. On the night of May 14th, Sharp began his solo summit push from Camp 3 at 27,390 feet. He moved slowly through the death zone, his inadequate oxygen supply forcing him to take frequent rests. Other expeditions passed him throughout the night, noting his sluggish pace and labored breathing. At approximately 8:30 a.m. on May 15th, Sharp reached the 29,032-foot summit, achieving his lifelong dream. But his celebration was brief. He had taken far too long to reach the top, and his oxygen was nearly depleted. The descent would prove fatal. Exhausted and suffering from severe altitude sickness, Sharp began hallucinating during his descent. He became disoriented near the second step at 28,117 feet, eventually stumbling into Green Boots Cave at 27,890 feet, the limestone alcove where Tsewang Paljor's body had rested for a decade. Sharp collapsed in the cave, his body shutting down from hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. His arms and legs became severely frostbitten, and he lost the ability to stand or move. Over the next several hours, more than 40 climbers from various expeditions passed the cave, seeing Sharp in his final moments. Some climbers stopped briefly, offering oxygen and attempting to rouse him, but Sharp was beyond help. His core body temperature had dropped too low, and he was essentially frozen in place. Moving an immobile climber from 27,890 feet was physically impossible, even with multiple rescuers. Mark Inglis, a double amputee from New Zealand, was among those who encountered Sharp. Inglis himself was suffering severe frostbite and had to be carried down portions of the mountain. The sight of Sharp dying in the cave haunted him, but there was nothing anyone could do. Sharp died alone in Green Boots Cave as the sun set on May 15th, his body joining the grim collection of casualties in Everest's death zone. His death sparked international outrage when news broke that dozens of climbers had passed him while he was still alive. The mathematics teacher who calculated every risk, except the human cost, became a cautionary tale about the deadly price of summit fever on the world's most unforgiving mountain. It was October 2nd, 1979, when Hannelore Schmatz made her final summit push on Mount Everest, becoming the first woman to die on the world's tallest peak. Schmatz was a 39-year-old German housewife from Munich, whose adventurous spirit had transformed her from a conventional suburban mother into one of Europe's most accomplished female mountaineers. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall with shoulder-length blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, she possessed an infectious enthusiasm that could light up any room. Her friends described her as fearlessly optimistic, someone who approached every challenge with unwavering determination. Born into a middle-class family, Hannelore had discovered mountaineering through her husband Gerhard Schmatz, a successful businessman and experienced climber. What began as weekend hikes in the Bavarian Alps evolved into a passionate obsession with high-altitude climbing. She quickly proved herself on peaks across the globe, conquering Manaslu and Lhotse with methodical precision. The 1979 Everest expedition represented the culmination of Hannelore's climbing career. At 39, she was determined to become only the fourth woman ever to reach the 29,032-foot summit. The team included her husband Gerhard, Swiss-American guide Ray Genet, and several experienced European climbers supported by Sherpa guides. The expedition faced brutal conditions from the start. A multi-day blizzard hammered their camps, but the team pressed forward with Germanic determination. At Camp 3 at 24,500 feet, they split into two groups for their summit attempts. Gerhard's team successfully reached the summit on October 1st, making him the oldest person to conquer Everest at age 50. He descended safely and radioed warnings to Hannelore about deteriorating weather conditions, urging her team to abandon their summit attempt. But Hannelore refused to turn back. She had invested too much time, money, and emotional energy to quit when the summit was within reach. Against her husband's advice, she began her final push at 5 a.m. on October 2nd, alongside Ray Janae and their Sherpa guide Sungdae. The weather was horrific. Howling winds exceeding 60 miles per hour whipped snow across the death zone, creating whiteout conditions. Temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, turning exposed skin to ice within minutes. Despite the brutal conditions, Hannelore's team reached the summit between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m., achieving her lifelong dream. She became the fourth woman to stand atop the world's highest peak, a historic accomplishment. But the descent became a nightmare. Exhausted from the climb and battling severe altitude sickness, Hannelore began moving slower with each step. Her oxygen supply dwindled as darkness approached, and hypothermia began shutting down her body's vital functions. At 28,000 feet, with night falling and the storm intensifying, Hannelore collapsed from exhaustion. Ray Janae had also run out of oxygen and was suffering from severe altitude sickness. Against Sungdae's desperate pleas to continue descending, both climbers decided to bivouac in the death zone. The decision proved fatal. Spending a night above 28,000 feet without shelter in minus 40-degree temperatures was essentially a death sentence. By morning, Ray Janae had succumbed to hypothermia, his body frozen solid against the mountain's icy slopes. Hannelore was still alive, but barely conscious. Sungdae helped her begin the descent, but she was too weak to continue. Her final words were a desperate plea for water before she collapsed and died just 330 feet above Camp 4. For over a decade, her corpse sat upright against her backpack with eyes open and hair whipping in the wind, becoming a sinister landmark for climbers. The housewife who conquered the world's tallest peak paid the ultimate price, becoming Everest's first female casualty. It was May 22, 1998, when Frances Arsentiev made her final summit push on Mount Everest, becoming known forever as Sleeping Beauty in the most tragic love story ever told on the world's highest peak. Frances was a 40-year-old American climber from Norwood, Colorado, whose petite 5'4" frame concealed the heart of a lioness. With flowing brown hair and gentle hazel eyes, she possessed a quiet intensity that drew people to her magnetic personality. Working as a homeopathic doctor, she approached mountaineering with methodical precision, studying every route and weather pattern with scientific dedication. Her husband, Sergei Arsentiev, was a 47-year-old Russian mountaineer whose weathered face told stories of countless expeditions across the world's most dangerous peaks. Standing 6 feet tall with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, Sergei was known for his old-school climbing philosophy and unwavering devotion to his wife. The former Soviet climber had immigrated to America, where he met Frances and discovered a kindred spirit. Together, they had conquered peaks across 6 continents, but Everest represented their ultimate challenge. Frances was determined to become the first American woman to reach the 29,032-foot summit without supplemental oxygen, a feat that would place her among mountaineering's elite. On May 22nd, the couple began their summit push from Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. They moved slowly but steadily through the death zone, conserving energy for the final assault. The weather was ideal, with minimal wind and clear skies providing perfect climbing conditions. At 6 p.m., Frances achieved her historic goal, becoming the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. She stood atop the world's highest peak alongside Sergei, their love story reaching its pinnacle 29,032 feet above sea level. The moment should have been pure triumph, but their celebration was brief. The late summit time meant they would be descending in darkness, navigating treacherous terrain with only headlamps for guidance. As night fell, the temperature plummeted to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and exhaustion began taking its toll on both climbers. Somewhere during the descent, the couple became separated in the darkness. Sergei, moving faster than his wife, continued down assuming Francis was behind him. But she had collapsed from exhaustion and oxygen deprivation at approximately 27,900 feet, unable to continue without rest. When Sergei realized Francis was missing, he made the agonizing decision to climb back up the mountain to search for her. Fighting against time and his own exhaustion, he ascended through the death zone, calling her name into the howling wind. Sergei found his wife alive but barely conscious, suffering from severe hypothermia and altitude sickness. He spent hours trying to help her descend, but she was too weak to walk. As dawn broke on May 23rd, other climbers discovered them together. Sergei had died during the night from exhaustion and exposure while trying to save his wife. Francis survived another day, encountered by several climbing expeditions who offered what help they could. But moving an immobile climber from 27,900 feet was impossible, even with multiple rescuers. She died on May 24th, her body coming to rest in a peaceful position that earned her the nickname Sleeping Beauty. For 9 years, Francis remained visible on the mountain, her body perfectly preserved by the freezing temperatures. Climbers described her as hauntingly beautiful, appearing to sleep peacefully in her colorful climbing gear. In 2007, her son Paul organized an expedition to move his mother's body to a more private location. The love story ended on Everest's slopes, where two souls paid the ultimate price for their shared dream. It was May 21st, 2018, when Nobukazu Kuriki made his 8th and final attempt on Mount Everest, becoming a haunting symbol of obsession and determination on the world's most unforgiving peak. Kuriki was a 35-year-old Japanese mountaineer whose boyish face and gentle demeanor masked an iron will that bordered on dangerous obsession. Standing 5 feet 7 inches tall with short black hair and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he looked more like a university student than one of Japan's most accomplished high-altitude climbers. Working as a freelance photographer and climbing instructor, Kuriki had dedicated his entire adult life to conquering the world's highest mountains. But Everest had become his white whale. Born in Hokkaido, Kuriki discovered mountaineering as a teenager and quickly developed an all-consuming passion for extreme altitude climbing. His friends described him as quietly determined and almost monk-like in his dedication, someone who would spend months planning every detail of his expeditions. Kuriki's relationship with Everest began in 2009, but it was his 2012 attempt that changed everything. During that expedition, he suffered severe frostbite while attempting the dangerous southwest face without supplemental oxygen. The mountain claimed 9 of his 10 fingers, leaving him with only his right thumb. Most climbers would have retired after such devastating injuries, but Kuriki saw it as merely a setback. The loss of his fingers transformed Kuriki into a media sensation in Japan, where his story of perseverance resonated with millions. He learned to climb using specially designed prosthetic fingers and modified equipment, refusing to let his disability end his mountaineering career. Between 2012 and 2018, Kuriki attempted Everest 7 more times, each failure only strengthening his resolve. He became obsessed with conquering the mountain via the treacherous southwest face, a route so dangerous that few climbers even attempted it. His approach was always the same: solo climbing without supplemental oxygen, relying purely on his physical conditioning and mental fortitude. For his 8th attempt in May 2018, Kuriki arrived at base camp in peak physical condition, despite his disabilities. At 35, he was still young enough to handle the extreme demands of high-altitude climbing, and his experience on the mountain was unmatched. Kuriki began his final summit push on May 20th, moving slowly but steadily up the southwest face. He documented his progress with regular video updates posted to social media, sharing his thoughts and emotions with thousands of followers. His final video showed him looking exhausted but determined as he prepared for the summit assault. On the morning of May 21st, Kuriki was found dead in his tent at Camp 2, located at approximately 21,300 feet. Sherpa guides discovered his body during a routine check, noting that he appeared to have died peacefully in his sleep. The official cause of death was listed as altitude sickness. The discovery shocked the mountaineering community and devastated his supporters in Japan. Kuriki had survived so many dangerous situations on Everest that many believed he was indestructible. His death at a relatively low altitude seemed almost impossible for someone with his experience. Weather conditions had been deteriorating rapidly, with high winds and heavy snowfall creating dangerous avalanche conditions. Kuriki may have been suffering from high-altitude cerebral edema or pulmonary edema, conditions that can be fatal even for experienced climbers. His body was evacuated from the mountain and returned to Japan, where he was mourned as a national hero. Kuriki's story became a cautionary tale about the fine line between determination and dangerous obsession. His 8 attempts on Everest represented both incredible perseverance and an inability to accept defeat that ultimately cost him his life on the mountain he could never conquer. If these death zone disasters sent chills down your spine, steel yourself for what awaits. Click the video on your screen for more bone-chilling tales of explorers who dared to push human limits beyond the point of no return.